Alright, in this video what I'm going to do is talk to you guys about what it takes to fix a car that doesn't start and kind of the procedure that you go through. And first thing we're going to talk about is cranks but doesn't start. Turn the key and it does nothing. That's another situation. So that's a no start. And then there's cranks but won't start. Means it turns over and over and over but doesn't start. Let's listen to see what that sounds like. So I've heard people say different types of things, but this is really what this is. The technical term for this is cranks but won't start. So it cranks over but it won't start. So we're going to use this 6-volt car as a candidate because that's what's broke down right now. So we want to make sure it starts when we're done. So typically if your car won't crank, I mean you turn the key on, does nothing, or just goes click or something like that. Usually there's two different things that it is. One is your battery, the other one is your starter, or it could be a connection between the starter and the ignition key or somewhere in there. But it's usually one of those two things. So I'm not going to really get into that very much. If that's the problem, what you want to do is check real quick your battery, which we're going to check in a second for condition, and then see if it's good. Check the connections at your battery, check the connections at your starter, and manually jump from the solenoid lead, which is the smaller lead. Most of them are push-on connector, but this is a very old starter. So from the solenoid lead, jump from here to here. So you take battery voltage and put it to with like a screwdriver. Make sure it's in neutral. Make sure when you're underneath it, it's not gonna fall off and get you. Just jump from here to here and see if the starter works after you've checked the battery. And if it does here, if it doesn't start here, then it's probably the starter. But if it does work when it's here, then you need to check your connections all the way up to your ignition switch and back. Later on in this video, I'll show you how to wire up something called a hard start relay for your 6-volt system. Hopefully I remember to do that in this video. I want to do that too in the same video. So if you look this up, you can find this as well. So anyway, now we're going to get back to cranks but won't start, and that's really what this video is mostly about. All right, so there's always 4 things that you need to know for a car to start: spark, fuel, compression, and timing. So your engine will not run without all 4 of those things. A lot of people think if they just see spark, they pull their plug wire or whatever, hold it to ground, and they see a little spark in there, go, okay, it's got spark. So that might not be an accurate way to check it. First thing you want to do is when you check your spark, you're going to want to check to make sure that the spark is either blue, or in some cases like a high energy ignition or electronic ignition, white, or a really long blue spark with that. Because if your spark is yellow, a lot of people don't know this, if your spark's yellow, it can be sparking out of the wire, but when it's under compression, when the cylinder is compressing, it won't spark. So that's a weak spark, is a yellow spark. Usually if you have a yellow spark, you have an issue. If you have a points car, it's usually an issue with your points. It could be if you're electronic ignition, you could have a problem with your control module. But if it's usually a points thing, usually those work or they don't work. So what you want to do is either file your points down and try it again, or put a new set of points in and try it, or it could also be the condenser is bad. We're seeing condensers bad in a very short period of time. I've seen them as bad as low as 80 miles. Even some of the best quality ones that you can buy still don't last. So again, a lot of times I'll go to a pointless ignition, or Magnus Spark is the better thing to do if you have space for it. Like in this old 36 horsepower 6-volt, there's no room for that. So if you've checked that you have spark, one of the reasons I like to put my fuel filters in the engine compartment, like they have this brand, it's even made in, was it Israel? Yeah, that's a good brand. And they have this cheaper German brand company that makes them. You know, buy whichever one you feel confident with, or even the Chinese ones. Yep, there's a melee in this one. But yeah, you know, you can do this at your own risk. If you decide to put your stuff in the compartment, that's fine. If not, that's people have reasons why they don't. I don't really like where this one's located. I'm going to move it because it's on the somebody else put it there. It's actually on the exhaust right here. That's not good. Not a good idea. But it's on the suction side, so usually when it's on the pressure side is when you have more issues with engine fire. So if it's on the pressure side, I always recommend myself to put clamps on everything. On the anything on the pressure side. On the suction side, it's not as critical, and because it doesn't just start splashing fuel on the distributor. So anyway, that's why I like to have these here, because I always look for there to be their fuel in it. That's my first check. Is like, oh, is it out of fuel? So no, there's enough in there, so I know I'm good. And then I'll check the carburetor and maybe drop a little bit of fuel in it, see if it starts. It'll kind of give you your indication if it's the fuel pump or just something plugged up in the carburetor. So how I will check compression, I'll show you that without having to pull the plugs and actually check the compression. You can kind of do something called a balance test. Well, if the battery's up, we'll be able to do it here. So this one's going to want to start. I thought it wouldn't. You hear that? You hear it get compression every time it hits a compression stroke. It is compressing. You can hear that real even. Now, if you have a problem, you'll hear something like that's telling you there's no compression in one cylinder. That's a balance test. It's an easier way to do it than actually getting on a compression gauge. So if you're hearing the starter strain as it hits compression every time, then you're probably going to be okay to start. Now, in the case of this car, it's not starting because the engine is not cranking over fast enough. So if it doesn't go over fast enough to get compression, then that will cause it to not start as well. So first thing we need to do on this one, because what the problem is with this car is it cranks over and it has spark, it has fuel, but it does not have enough crank, does not crank over fast enough for it to start. So that can be on this situation is it could be one of two things. It could be, well, it could be one of three things. I know that the starter's good, so I'm not going to include that. So the two things that I'm going to check are the starter, or the battery, and the starter bushing. Okay, on a 6-volt car, they're very sensitive. So we got it at 6, what does that say? 6.1. Maybe get you guys up on a little closer view. Let's get you on like that one, and so you can see. And let's see. So we're at 6.3 volts, which is, I think, fully charged. So now what we're going to do is do something called a load test. So these things here are available at Harbor Freight. Not expensive. Unless it has tape on the gauge, though. That's because it's Harbor Freight. But it still works. So I push the load test and I wait 15 seconds and see if it starts to drop. It is kind of weak. If you see here, seeing the battery's weak. It's kind of marginal. But usually what happens after about 15 seconds, which we're approaching right now, and I haven't been watching the clock because I'm watching you guys. So I think you're supposed to do 15 seconds on, 15 seconds off, 15 seconds on again, and then it should start to creep down. And I'm not seeing it doing that. So it's going down to 5 volts and holding pretty well. So I'm going to say it probably is not the battery. It still could be, because these things are not very good. These Harbor Freight ones are, they work, but they're not really that great. So it's probably not the battery, and we're not 100% sure of that. It still could be, because it's mage, it's weak, right? It shows on there weak, so it could be the battery. So the way it's cranking over, you can kind of hear it's a little draggy sounding. And what goes out on these things often, something called a starter bushing. It's inside here, inside your starter. There's a bushing right here, and that bushing should be replaced every time you replace the starter. Let's see if I have one here. It looks like this here, and what I do is typically I'll take a 1/4 inch pipe tap. I think it's a 1/4 inch, whatever size that one is. You guys can read that. That'll be, yeah, 1/4 inch pipe tap, and thread it into the old bushing. And then what I'll do is I'll grab this with a pair of vice grips, and then I'll pry the old one out. So that usually does it. You can get it out pretty easily by doing that. I'll pry that out with the starter out, and then I'll take the new one and I'll put it back in with a I think it's a 3/8 extension. Let's try if I got one in here. 3/8 extension. So because these are cheap and I buy these in bulk, I'm going to go ahead and replace this, and then if it's still cranking slow, then I'll just get a new battery, because the batteries are more expensive now. Especially 6-volt batteries are not that cheap. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And all right, let's pull the starter out of this thing. I got a lot of cobwebs down here. It looks like, yeah, the Black Widow, I don't know. Doesn't feel like it. You know, my wife one time, she picked up a Black Widow. She didn't even know it was Black Widow. She didn't see the red dot on it or anything. It didn't do anything, you know. She thought it was like one of the kids. It was Halloween time. She thought it was just a kid's fake one, and left it on the seat of the car. It was the Black Widow. It really don't. Very rare that somebody gets sick and dies from it, but it's kind of like some of the other things out there. All right, let's get this bolt out. Almost got her. There it is. All right, so you guys notice there's my hard start relay, and you notice I got one of the leads going to ground. Okay, the one that used to go to the starter goes to the other side of that circuit. Okay, so when you turn the key on the starter, it clicks the relay. Okay, that's what that's job is to do. And then what happens is one goes from the starter. So I got that one hooked up somewhere else. It goes through from here, right here, actually. That one that I'm wiggling. That one goes from there over to here, and then comes back to here. So it gets direct battery voltage from the starter right here, okay, from the starter lead, and goes from here to the slip-on up here on the top. Okay, so it just goes through the relay and goes to that lead. So when the relay is energized, when the starter key is turned on, it clicks the points inside here, and then that makes a really short connection, basically from here to the starter lead. Battery voltage to the starter lead. It's real simple. Hopefully you understand it. Anyway, let's get the starter out. I know I replaced it. I knew the starter's good. I don't know if I did the bushing. Maybe not. Who knows? I'll just replace it. It's not hard. Good practice is always make sure you get the correct starter bushing. So there's a 6-volt and a 12-volt starter. This 12-volt starters, I believe, are smaller, if I remember right. Have a smaller shaft. So then we're going to use this little tapper. We're going to thread the old one and then just pull it out. Let's do it. All right, so it's in there like that. Kind of nice. So it's just through a few threads in there. Hopefully it's enough. I'm just going to put some vice grips on there. Don't let it fall down in the hole or you'll be pulling the motor. Well, you might be able to get out with a magnet, but it's a little tricky. All right, let's see if I can get this on camera. This will be interesting. Usually I do this here. This is a pry bar. I got like that. I'll get you guys back a little bit so you can see. So I got a pry bar and I put it in the vice grips. Let's see if it works. Sometimes it takes a little bit of I might have to tighten it up a little bit more. Yankee to get that sucker out of there. I had to actually saw them in half too. Sometimes. The last one I did just slid right out. You only need a few threads on here, but I'm gonna turn it a little bit more because it was kind of thinking about coming off. So I give it one more turn, and then we'll get on there and do a little more Yankee. Let me tighten these up a little more and we'll try it again. All right, got a different pair of vice grips. They have a little stronger jaw to them. I don't know, I think maybe it's just because these ones are not quite square on the end of it, and it was only getting one tooth. So these are real vice grip brand. So it just took, what I had to do is just kind of wiggle it a little bit, and then it just started pulling out with this bar, just like I showed you in there. That's how I got it out. So it's usually does it. It's a little tough sometimes, so especially when you're on the ground. I get it. If you're on the ground, it's harder. All right, to pilot the new one in, I usually use a shorty extension, but this will work right here. This is just a hex head, and I'm just gonna put an extension on it like so I can gently hammer it in. Just got to be careful not to hit it in too far. This one might allow me to do that, but I think we'll be fine. The old saying, spit on it before you stick it in. I can tell you the bushing didn't really look that bad, but listen to this. I disconnected the coil wire so it won't start. That's a little faster than before, huh? Seems like it to me. I don't know. I think I'll just hold off on the battery then. I'll just, I thought the battery would be bad, but it sure does sound different. Sounds a lot better. All right, so I guess the bushing. All right, some of you keyboard experts can tell me what you think on that. It didn't look like it was worn. Now, I mean, you can see usually you can see it's just like worn to one side. It doesn't look like it was, but the new starter bushing, it sure does crank over a lot faster. I don't know. That's why you got to eliminate these things. You know, when you do a 6-volt car, this sucker's got to be in good shape or it's not going to crank over right. So anyway, I think that's all it was, the starter bushing. But yeah, it's kind of wacko, huh? Doesn't look that bad. Just tells you. Doesn't take much. Let's try it again with the coil wire hooked up. Fires right up. If you notice that light turns off to a dim light. I'll try it again tonight, you know, I mean, I'll keep you guys informed. I'm going to try it again tonight, and after it's cold, really, really cold, and see if it does it then. I had it not start right in the middle of the day, same temperature as it is right now, with it set up before, so I think something improved. Maybe it didn't get spit on before it got stuck in. I don't know, I always do that, so I don't know. Who knows? Who knows? The mysteries that lurk in Volkswagen world. I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Please like, share, and subscribe.